Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world, one book at a time. The book we're looking at today uncovers the system behind a decades-long stealth campaign to limit democratic power. And it's so important because it reframes what can seem like chaotic political events into a coherent, long-term strategy.
So the book is Democracy in Chains by the historian Nancy MacLean, and it tackles a question a lot of us have been asking. I mean, you look at a series of really aggressive political actions in recent years. Things like stripping public unions of their rights, or deep cuts to education, new voting restrictions. These moves often felt like they went way beyond just normal partisanship, right? It left a lot of people wondering, why the all-out war?
Well, this is where the book poses a pretty chilling question. What if these events aren't random? What if it's not just extreme politics? What if it's all actually part of a deliberate, coordinated campaign that's been in the works for decades? Just asking that one question completely reframes the entire problem, and it sets us on a path to understand the deep history behind a pretty radical plan for America.
To find that plan, MacLean argues we have to look past the usual suspects, the politicians we see on TV. Instead, we need to focus on one central figure, the Nobel Prize-winning economist James M. Buchanan. He's presented not just as some thinker, but as the intellectual architect of a blueprint designed to fundamentally alter American democracy.
And this right here, this gets to the core system insight of the whole book. See, Buchanan's big idea was that you don't actually need to get rid of elections to constrain democracy. No, instead, you just redesign the rules. You change the courts and the Constitution itself to create these permanent locks and bolts that block the majority from using the government to address its needs, especially if those needs require taxing the wealthy.
And this really illustrates the logic. I mean, why fight over who gets elected? That's a temporary victory at best. The real power is in changing the underlying rules of the system itself. Buchanan argued that for liberty, as he defined it, to thrive, you had to put constitutional shackles on public officials. Shackles so powerful that no matter what the voters might want, their hands are tied. So, okay, if that's the blueprint, how is it actually put into practice? Well, the book identifies several key operational patterns. Think of it as a strategy for a kind of stealth revolution, all focused on altering the incentives and constraints across our society. Let's dig into 3 of them.
First up, the strategy absolutely relies on stealth. Charles Koch, who is a key financial backer of this whole project, is quoted as saying, "Since we are greatly outnumbered, the movement just can't win through open persuasion. Instead, it has to use a covert strategy." And part of that meant using a lot of academic jargon, terms like public choice theory, to basically obscure the plan's pretty radical goals from public view.
Second, it was all about building a vast, integrated network. This involved creating and funding this whole web of think tanks, academic centers, and advocacy groups. And the key here is that these weren't just separate entities doing their own thing. Nope, they were designed to work together, to train operatives, and to push a single, unified agenda into state houses and courtrooms all across the country.
And third, strategically weaponizing cynicism. This is all about relentlessly attacking the public's trust in government. It works by framing civic life as this constant battle between productive makers and so-called parasitic takers. The ones who use the government to get unearned benefits. The goal is to erode support for any kind of collective action and the very idea of a common good.
It's a pretty complex system, I know, but there's this one single visual metaphor that really helps anchor the whole concept and makes it feel a lot more intuitive.
I want you to imagine democracy as a large, ornate room. Inside, everything looks normal. Debates are happening, votes are being cast, all the rituals of representative government seem to be working. But what you don't see, what's happening behind the scenes, is that the exits have been quietly sealed. The underlying rules, the Constitution, have been changed in all these subtle ways to make sure that only certain outcomes are possible. It effectively traps the majority inside a system that can no longer respond to its will.
So the really crucial point here is that this framework gives us a totally new lens for seeing the world. It shifts our whole perception of what political power is actually about. Ultimately, what this book helps us notice is that the biggest, most important political fights might not be the ones we see on the news every night. The focus shifts away from the politicians and onto the policies, away from the candidates and onto the Constitution. It suggests the real conflict is a much deeper, structural struggle over the rulebook that governs our entire society. And the question it leaves us with is a big one. Who gets to write the rules?
This project is free and publicly accessible.
If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis and perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a longer, audio-based analysis of this topic, see the deep dive linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.